The day started like any other. Mom was off to visit Grandma, a 3-hour drive away, leaving Dad and me alone in the house. She'd packed a weekend bag, kissed us goodbye, and left us with a fridge full of leftovers and a list of chores. Dad seemed cheerful, humming to himself as he made coffee. I watched him from across the kitchen island, noticing how relaxed he seemed without Mom's usual bustling energy. It wasn't that they didn't get along, but there was always a certain tension between them, unspoken yet palpable. "You've got plans today?" he asked, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "Not really," I replied. "Just some schoolwork. You?" He shrugged. "Thought I'd tackle the garage. It's a mess in there." I nodded, though I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about the idea. The garage was like a black hole of forgotten projects and clutter. "Could use some help," he added, flashing me a grin. I groaned but agreed. Dad wasn't the kind of person to ask for help often, and I figured spending a few hours organizing would make the time pass faster. By mid-morning, we were knee-deep in boxes and tools. The garage was sweltering, the summer heat turning it into a sauna. Dad had stripped down to a tank top, his usual button-up shirt tossed over a chair. "This stuff hasn't been touched in years," I remarked, pulling out a box filled with old photo albums. "Yeah," Dad replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Your mom's always saying we should go through it, but, life gets busy." He leaned against the workbench, flipping through one of the albums. His face softened as he came across a photo of him and Mom from their early days. They looked so young, so carefree. Things were different back then, he said, almost to himself. I didn't press him for more. Instead, I started sorting through another box, filled with knickknacks and tools. The hours passed, and the garage slowly began to look less like a disaster zone. Dad's mood seemed to lighten, and we even shared a few laughs over some of the random items we unearthed. As we were finishing up, Dad opened a box labeled Memories. Inside were letters, ticket stubs, and trinkets from years past. He picked up a bracelet and held it up to the light. "Your mom made this for me when we were dating," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. I smiled, but there was a hint of something in his tone, a wistfulness that didn't quite fit the moment. The garage was finally tidy, a small victory we both celebrated with cold drinks on the porch. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue across the yard. Dad seemed quieter than usual, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "You okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. He nodded but didn't look at me. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" He took a deep breath, his fingers drumming against the armrest of his chair. "Life, I guess. How fast it moves. How easy it is to get stuck." The last word lingered in the air. I didn't know what to say, so I just sipped my drink, waiting for him to elaborate. He continued, "when I was your age, I had so many dreams, places I wanted to go, things I wanted to do." He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. "And then life happened. Marriage, kids, responsibilities. Not that I regret it, but sometimes you wonder what could have been?" I finished for him. He glanced at me, surprised. "Yeah, exactly." I understood more than he realized. At my age, I already felt the weight of expectations pressing down on me. College, career, family. It all seemed so mapped out, like there wasn't room for detours. "I think everyone feels that way at some point," I offered. "It doesn't mean you're not happy." "True," he said, nodding slowly. "But it's easy to lose pieces of yourself along the way." The conversation felt heavier than I was used to with Dad, but it also felt important, like he was letting me in on a part of himself I hadn't seen before. After a while, he stood up, stretching. "Let's order some dinner. My treat." We ended up eating pizza in the living room, the TV playing an old sitcom neither of us really paid attention to. It was nice, just the two of us, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Later that evening, as I was heading to my room, I heard Dad's voice call from the living room. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I turned back, curious. "Sure." He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "Do you think I've been a good father?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course," I said without hesitation. "Why would you even ask that?" He shrugged, looking down at his hands. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I could have done more. Been more. "Dad," I said firmly, stepping closer. "You've done plenty. You're here, you care, and that means everything." His eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw tears glistening there, but he blinked them away quickly, giving me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, kiddo," he said softly. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. As I turned to leave, I couldn't help but feel that this day had unearthed more than just old boxes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Dad's words played over and over in my mind. It wasn't like him to be so introspective, so vulnerable. I wondered what had triggered it. Was it just the nostalgia of going through the old boxes? Or was there something deeper he wasn't telling me? The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of the fridge. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of the day's conversations pressing down on me. Around midnight, I decided to get some water. Padding down the hallway, I noticed the faint glow of the living room light spilling into the corridor. Curious, I peeked around the corner. Dad was still awake, sitting on the couch with a drink in hand. His head was tilted back, eyes closed, but he didn't seem asleep. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, stepping into the room. His eyes opened and he gave me a tired smile. "Guess not." I sat down on the other end of the couch, pulling a throw blanket over my lap. "What's on your mind?" He took a sip of his drink, swirling the ice around in the glass before answering. "Your mom and I had a fight before she left. Nothing serious, just one of those arguments that sticks with you." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "She thinks I'm distant," he admitted. "That I don't talk to her enough. But the truth is, sometimes I don't know what to say." "Why not?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of making things worse." It was strange seeing Dad like this, so uncertain, so human. He'd always been the strong one, the steady presence in our lives. "Maybe she just wants to know what you're thinking," I suggested. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "And what if what I'm thinking isn't what she wants to hear?" For a moment, the room felt heavy with unspoken words. I didn't know what he meant exactly, but I could sense the weight of it. "Sometimes," he continued, "I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like the person I am now isn't who I was supposed to be." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd had those thoughts too, though I never imagined Dad would. "Maybe it's not about being who you were supposed to be," I said carefully, "but about finding a way to be happy with who you are now." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "You're wise beyond your years, you know that?" I smiled, though it felt bittersweet. "I learned from the best." Dad chuckled softly, but the sadness in his eyes remained. We sat there in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but was filled with unspoken understanding. Eventually, I got up to go back to bed, placing a hand on his shoulder as I passed. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, kiddo," he replied, his voice soft. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this night would stay with me forever. The next morning, the house was quiet again. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the living room in a warm, golden glow. I found Dad in the kitchen, already up, nursing a cup of coffee. His expression was unreadable, a mix of calm and something deeper. "Morning," I said, grabbing a mug for myself. "Morning," he replied. "Sleep better?" I nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. The weight of our conversation lingered, but I didn't want to press him about it. We spent the day in a kind of unspoken rhythm, tending to small tasks around the house. There was something almost peaceful about it, though the air between us felt fragile, like a thread stretched too thin. In the afternoon, Dad suggested we go for a drive. "Clear our heads," he said. I agreed, curious to see where he was taking me. We ended up at the park where he used to take me as a kid. The place hadn't changed much. Same weathered benches, same towering oak trees. We walked along the path in silence until we reached the small pond at the center. "I used to bring you here when you were little," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "You'd run straight to the ducks every time." I smiled at the memory. I remember. He sat down on a bench, and I joined him, the sound of rustling leaves filling the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about last night," he began, his gaze fixed on the water. I didn't say anything, letting him find the words. "You were right," he admitted. "It's not about what could have been. It's about finding a way to be happy with what is." I glanced at him, surprised by the shift in his tone. "I've spent so much time dwelling on the past," he continued, "on the things I feel I missed out on. But the truth is, I have so much to be grateful for. Your mom, you, our life together. I need to remember that more often." His honesty caught me off guard, but it also filled me with a quiet sense of relief. "I think everyone feels lost sometimes," I said gently. "But it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong." He nodded, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Thanks, kiddo, for listening, for understanding." We sat there for a while, watching the ducks glide across the pond. The moment felt significant, like a turning point for both of us. By the time we returned home, the tension from the past couple of days seemed to have lifted. Dad seemed lighter, more present, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. When Mom returned later that evening, the house was filled with her usual warmth and energy. Dad greeted her with a smile, pulling her into a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. As I watched them, I realized that even the strongest relationships have their cracks. But it's the effort to mend them that truly matters.